The weight of that revelation hit Thane like a physical blow, more painful than the jagged iron that had nearly ended him. As he stared at the grainy ink of the newspaper, the luxury of his past life, the marble floors, the billion-dollar handshakes, the effortless power, felt like a grotesque dream compared to the raw, honest survival he had witnessed in this trailer. He looked at his hands, once soft and pampered, now crisscrossed with the same jagged scars as Bella's, and he felt a surge of protective fury for the woman who had risked everything for a stranger who didn't even know his own name. He knew that the black SUVs weren't just searching for him. They were coming to finish the job, and if they found him here, Bella and Poppy would be the first ones to pay the price for his existence. He stood up, his posture shifting into the commanding presence of the man in the photo, but his eyes remained on the small drawing of a butterfly Poppy had left on the table. He whispered to Bella that he had to leave tonight, not to run back to his throne, but to lead the wolves away from the only place that had ever felt like a home. Yet the look she gave him wasn't one of fear. It was the look of a woman who had already decided that if he was going into a fight, she wasn't letting him go alone. But as they began to pack a small bag, a sudden heavy thud echoed against the thin metal door of the trailer, followed by the terrifyingly familiar click of a high-end car door closing just outside. The silence inside the trailer became deafening, broken only by the frantic, shallow breaths of little Poppy as Bella instinctively shielded her behind the thin kitchen counter. Thane moved with a silent, predatory grace he hadn't known he possessed, his eyes locking onto the shadows moving past the frosted window glass. He could see the silhouettes of two massive men in dark suits, their presence an oily stain on the dusty twilight of the trailer park, and he knew they weren't here to negotiate or offer an apology for the ditch they'd left him in. One of the men leaned in, his heavy knuckles hovering over the door again, but before he could strike, Thane signaled Bella to stay absolutely silent, his mind racing through every tactical advantage he'd ever learned in the cutthroat boardrooms of Chicago. He realized then that these men didn't just want him dead. They wanted the gold watch, the signature, and the final piece of evidence that could link Paxton to the attempted murder. The air in the room felt thick enough to choke on as the door handle began to turn slowly, the cheap lock straining against a professional's touch, and Thane felt a cold, familiar iron settling into his veins as he grabbed the heavy wrench he'd used to fix the sink. Just as the door creaked open an inch, exposing the polished toe of an expensive Italian loafer, a loud, sharp voice from the neighboring trailer shattered the tension, as Adette stepped out onto her porch with a double-barrel shotgun leveled at the intruders' heads. Adette didn't look like a frail old woman in that moment. She looked like the seasoned sergeant she had been, her one leg planted firmly on her porch and her eyes fixed on the men with a terrifying, icy stare. The two henchmen froze, their hands hovering near their jackets as they realized they were staring down the barrel of a weapon held by someone who clearly knew how to use it. Adette shouted for them to get their shiny shoes off her property before she gave them a few extra holes to breathe through, her voice carrying a gravelly authority that echoed through the entire trailer park. The men looked at each other, then back at the scarred woman on the porch, and realized that causing a scene in a place where people looked out for their own was a losing game. They backed away slowly, their faces twisting into promises of future violence, and piled back into the black SUV, the tires kicking up a cloud of choking dust as they sped away toward the main road. Inside the trailer, Bella collapsed against the wall, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, while Thane dropped the wrench, his knuckles white from the grip. They had survived the first encounter, but the look in Thane's eyes told Bella that the hunt had only just begun, and the peace of their junkyard sanctuary was officially a thing of the past. As the dust settled outside, Thane turned to Bella and realized that to protect her, he wouldn't just have to remember who he was. He was going to have to become the monster his enemies feared most. Thane stood in the center of the cramped living space, the flickering fluorescent light overhead casting long, jagged shadows across the peeling wallpaper, making him look like a ghost that had finally decided to haunt the living. He watched Bella, whose hands were still trembling as she clutched Poppy to her chest, and the sight of her fear ignited a cold, calculated fire in his gut that no amount of Chicago corporate training could ever replicate. He knew the layout of the city, the hidden ledgers, and the secret bank accounts that could ruin Paxton in a single afternoon, but none of that mattered if he couldn't get these two innocent souls to safety first. "They're not going to stop," Thane whispered, his voice dropping into that low, dangerous register that used to make his board of directors sweat in their silk chairs. "Paxton is a coward who hides behind muscle, but he's desperate, and a desperate man with a billion-dollar empire at stake is a man who will burn down an entire zip code just to cover his tracks. He walked over to the small kitchen table, picking up the blunt pencil he'd used to draw the butterfly, and began sketching a map of the city's back roads on the back of a grocery receipt, his mind working with the mechanical precision of a high-frequency trading algorithm. He realized that the only way to beat a man who played with shadow money was to step back into the dark himself, using the very tools of the underworld he'd spent a decade pretending didn't exist. He looked at the gold watch sitting on the counter, the king of nothing, engraving mocking him with its shimmering surface, and he knew he had to sell it, not for the money, but to create a digital trail that would lure Paxton's men to a location miles away from this trailer. Every second they stayed here was a second they were giving the wolves time to regroup, to call in more SUVs, to bring the kind of firepower that even a Det's shotgun couldn't hold back forever. He felt a strange, heavy ache in his chest as he realized he was about to trade the quiet, painful honesty of the junkyard for the glittering lies of his old life, and for the first time, the thought of his penthouse and his private jet felt like a prison sentence rather than a reward. Bella watched him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of the man who had clumsily stripped copper wire just days ago, but all she found was a predator who had finally remembered how to hunt. "You're going to kill them, aren't you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper above the hum of the old refrigerator, and the silence that followed was the only answer she needed to know that the man she had saved was gone, replaced by the man who was about to save her. He didn't answer because the truth was too ugly for this room. Instead, he reached out and took her hand, his thumb brushing over her calloused knuckles with a tenderness that felt like a goodbye. He had to become a king again, but as he looked around the tiny leaking trailer, he knew that the crown he was about to take back was made of nothing but thorns and cold, hard cash. He told her to pack only what they could carry, his eyes fixed on the door as if he could see the future unfolding in the dark Detroit night, a future where blood would be spilled and empires would fall, all for the sake of a girl with an empty inhaler and a mother who wouldn't look away. But as he reached for the door handle to check the perimeter, he heard the low, unmistakable hum of a drone hovering just inches above the trailer's roof. The high-pitched mechanical whine of the drone felt like a needle drilling directly into Thane's brain, a digital predator circling its prey in the pitch-black sky above them. He didn't even have to look up to know that Paxton was watching them through a high-definition thermal lens, seeing their heat signatures through the thin metal roof like glowing ghosts trapped in a tin can. "Down! Get on the floor now!" Thane hissed, his voice a whip-crack of authority that sent Bella and Poppy diving into the narrow gap between the sofa and the wall just as a blinding spotlight cut through the window, turning the interior of the trailer into a clinical, white interrogation room. The game had shifted from a back-alley hunt to a high-tech assassination attempt, and Thane realized with a sickening jolt that his deputy wasn't just coming for him anymore. He was treating this entire block like a scorched earth zone. He crawled toward the back of the trailer, his fingers finding the heavy rusted emergency wrench he'd stashed under the sink, while his mind raced through the protocols of a man who once controlled a global security apparatus. He knew that the drone was likely tethered to a command vehicle parked at the edge of the scrapyard, and that meant his window of escape was closing in heartbeats, not minutes. The light from outside swung wildly, illuminating the peeling linoleum and the half-eaten bowl of cereal on the counter, making the poverty of their surroundings look like a crime scene before the crime had even been committed. Bella was hyperventilating, her eyes wide and terrified as she clutched Poppy, whose small chest was beginning to heave with the telltale signs of a stress-induced asthma attack. Thane reached over, his hand steadying Bella's shoulder, his touch grounding her in the middle of the chaos even as his own heart hammered against his ribs like a sledgehammer. "Bella, listen to me. We have to move through the floorboards, the way I showed you when I fixed the pipes. The thermal won't pick us up as clearly if we stay under the chassis and move toward the scrap piles," he whispered, his eyes never leaving the window. He knew that if they stepped out the front door, they'd be lit up like Christmas trees for a sniper or a tactical team. But if they crawled through the oily, freezing mud beneath the trailers, they had a chance to vanish into the labyrinth of crushed cars and rusted industrial tanks. He felt a sudden, sharp pang of guilt that his presence had brought this technological nightmare to a woman who just wanted to buy her daughter a breath of air, and he swore that if they made it out, he would bury Paxton under the weight of his own greed. The drone dipped lower, the air from its rotors kicking up a storm of dust against the trailer's sides that sounded like 1,000 tiny fingers scratching to get in. Thane grabbed a heavy winter coat and threw it over Bella and Poppy, hoping the thick fabric would mask their heat signatures just enough to confuse the sensors for a few critical seconds. He then jammed the wrench into the door's locking mechanism, rigging it to look like they were barricading themselves inside, a classic bait-and-switch that he hoped would buy them enough time to reach the darkness of the yard. On 3, we drop through the hatch. Don't look back, don't scream. Just crawl like your life depends on it, because it does, he commanded, his face inches from Bella's as the spotlight outside began to pulse, a signal that the ground team was moving in. He felt the weight of the King of Nothing watch in his pocket, a golden anchor to a past he now loathed, and he realized that the only thing he truly owned in this world was the safety of the 2 people shivering next to him. Just as he kicked open the floor hatch, a deafening explosion rocked the front of the trailer, sending a shower of sparks and shattered glass flying over their heads as the front door was blown clean off its hinges. The world turned into a chaotic blur of orange fire and stinging smoke as the shockwave from the blast slammed into Thane's back, nearly tossing him into the darkness of the floor hatch. He didn't wait for the ringing in his ears to stop. He grabbed Bella and Poppy by their waists and literally shoved them into the crawl space beneath the trailer, the freezing mud and oily gravel biting into his skin as he dropped down right behind them. Above them, the trailer was being torn apart by high-velocity rounds that chewed through the thin aluminum walls like they were made of wet paper, the deafening staccato of automatic fire drowning out everything but the sound of his own thundering pulse. He pulled the thick, heavy winter coat over the 3 of them, huddling in the pitch-black, cramped space under the chassis while the smell of burning plastic and gasoline filled the air. They were inches away from death, trapped in the muck, and Thane could feel the vibration of heavy boots hitting the trailer floor just inches above his head as the tactical team moved in to clear the kill zone. He held his hand over Poppy's mouth, not to scare her, but to keep her tiny gasps of terror from giving them away. His other arm wrapped around Bella so tight he could feel her heart slamming against his ribs. Through the gaps in the trailer's frame, he could see the flickering blue and red strobes of the drone's navigation lights reflecting off the puddles, and he knew they had maybe 60 seconds before someone thought to look down. In the suffocating darkness, Thane's mind didn't panic. It sharpened into a weapon, calculating the distance to the first pile of crushed cars, the wall of iron, that marked the edge of the deep scrap yard. He knew every inch of this mud because he'd bled into it for weeks, and he realized the attackers were overconfident, assuming no one could have survived that initial breach. "Crawl, now," he mouthed into Bella's ear, his voice a ghost of a sound as they began to snake through the freezing sludge, their bellies scraping against rusted pipes and sharp jagged rocks that tore at their clothes. Every movement felt like an eternity, every clink of a zipper against a metal strut sounding like a church bell in the silence between the gunshots above. He led them toward the back of the lot, using the heavy scent of leaked diesel to mask their own human scent from any dogs the team might have brought along. His eyes locked on the silhouette of a massive, rusted-out industrial tank that could serve as their first real cover. He felt the cold mud seeping into his suit, the suit that cost more than this entire trailer park, and he realized with a dark iron satisfaction that he had never felt more alive than he did right now, fighting for something that wasn't a profit margin. They reached the edge of the wall of iron, a mountain of compressed steel that smelled of old oil and forgotten lives, and Thane pulled them into a narrow, lightless crevice between 2 flattened sedans. He looked back and saw the trailer, Bella's home, her only sanctuary, erupt into a massive fireball as a secondary charge ignited the propane tanks, the light turning the Detroit sky a hellish, bruised purple. Bella let out a jagged, silent sob, her eyes reflecting the destruction of everything she owned, but Thane grabbed her face, forcing her to look at him, to see the absolute, unwavering resolve in his eyes. "I will build you a palace for every splinter of that wood, Bella. I promise you," he swore, the heat from the fire warming the back of his neck as the tactical team began to fan out, their flashlights cutting through the smoke like white sabers. He knew Paxton was watching the feed, probably smiling in some high-rise office in Chicago, thinking he'd finally turned the King of Nothing into ashes and dust. But as Thane reached into the wreckage of a nearby car to find a weapon, his fingers closed around a heavy, discarded flare gun, and he realized he wasn't just going to escape. He was going to send a message that would be seen from here to the Chicago skyline.